Harry Bolton was a first-year student at the University of Hull. He was a remarkably bright learner, and he'd been looking forward to university for years. Like everyone, he enjoyed the new sense of freedom that came with campus life, and he had plenty of friends and social engagements in that first year. But Harry always kept up with his studies. Unlike the rest, Harry always seemed to have a good handle on juggling classes, studying, and he still managed to have enough time to enjoy the fun that was going on around him. He was the one that his classmates turned to when they found themselves swamped with the workload. Just talking to Harry was enough to motivate them to do better. That was just Harry's way, calm, collected, and even a little stern if he needed to be. In other words, Harry was the kind of boy that mothers hoped their daughters would bring home, the kind of guy that parents wanted their kids to befriend, and he was sure to become every bit as successful as he dreamed of being one day. Those first few months of 2023 just flew by. It wasn't until the second trimester that Harry had any complaints. He made a call to the campus maintenance office with a complaint about a spider infestation, and he wasn't the only one. Harry's call was the fourth complaint that the department received that month. They eventually did send someone out to have a look at the problem, but in all honesty, the concerns weren't taken all that seriously. The inspectors that came out didn't find any sign of spiders, despite 5 people in the building having complained about them. After this amount of calls, it was almost certain that there was a problem, and simply searching Harry's room wasn't nearly enough effort to put in. The dormitory is 4 stories high, and it holds a basement and numerous storage units inside. Those spiders could have been anywhere. To make matters worse, they came out during the day, when the halls were at their busiest. Harry had taken a picture on his phone of the last one he'd seen before making the call, but the inspector informed him that it was just a common house spider, a harmless creature that can be found all over the world. The inspector was right. It was just a house spider, but he was wrong that there wasn't an infestation. If he'd looked properly, he'd have found massive nests of them in the roof, the store cupboards, and even behind the electrical sockets inside the dorm rooms. The place was crawling with the 8-legged little hunters, and the fact that they weren't venomous created a lack of urgency, when in fact a snake, spider, scorpion, or any kind of insect can inflict a deadly bite, even without venom behind it. Any animal bite, mammal, reptile, or arachnid, has a tendency to lead to nasty infections. Infection from animal bites causes more deaths than the animals themselves. When Harry started to complain about an ache in his back and neck, he'd probably already been bitten days before he even started showing symptoms. But the cold of autumn that was setting in hid the warmth and the swelling in the wound somewhat. That, and the fact that he'd been bitten on his lower back where he couldn't see the bump that was forming, kept the wound hidden until it was a massive problem. Harry did go into the emergency room, where they discovered the small red spot on his back. It hurt when the female nurse touched it, and it was red. She noted that his heart rate was slightly elevated and that he was running a mild fever. But Harry wasn't in any critical condition, so she prescribed him pain medication and antibiotics to clear up the infection. They wouldn't get the blood work back for a few more days, and since Harry was only in a mild amount of pain and his vitals were in no danger of causing any immediate problems, he was allowed to check out without too much concern. The medicine would probably have worked perfectly well if Harry didn't go home for the weekend. There he showed his parents the wound, and they drained it for him using tissues and household wound disinfectant. This was where everything went terribly wrong. Harry didn't know it, but all that pus was being kept inside a sack. This hard sack, filled with pus and infectious tissue, was safe as long as it stayed intact until the antibiotics could get a chance to do its work. But when the sack was punctured with a sewing needle, it burst inward. Harry's parents probably thought they'd gotten most of it out, if not all of it, because they drained enough of it to use up half a box of tissues. But most of it actually leaked straight into Harry's bloodstream and spinal cord, poisoning him from the inside. Initially, Harry felt so much relief from the now empty wound that they all thought that the problem was solved, and whatever was left would be taken care of by the medicine. But the antibiotics prescribed to him were no match for a full-body invasion. Harry was feeling so much better that he even returned to school on Sunday. But when he woke up on Monday morning, he told his roommate, Liam, that he was nauseous and that his back was on fire. His buddy left for classes, leaving Harry in bed, only after Harry assured him that he'd return to the emergency room that afternoon. He just wanted to get some sleep first. Liam attended his classes and even put in a shift at work that night, but he was becoming increasingly worried about Harry. He'd sent a few texts to ask if Harry went back to see a doctor, but Harry never replied. Liam rushed home after his shift and immediately stopped at the front door to hear if Harry had left his key there. Harry always locked his door when he was inside his room, and if he headed out, he always left his key for Liam at the front door. When the night shift girl informed him that Harry hadn't left his key there, Liam headed off to Harry's bedroom door. But after knocking for 10 minutes without getting a reply, Liam called campus security. When the security guard breached the door, they made the terrible discovery. Harry was long dead. His eyes were open and his mouth agape. And when Liam shook him to get a response, Harry was already cold to the touch. It wasn't until the paramedics arrived and they turned him over to load him onto the stretcher that they discovered that the small bump had collapsed into a massive crater on Harry's lower back. The raw wound was so big that a quarter could comfortably fit inside of the opening. Just 2 days after draining what would have been a perfectly treatable wound, Harry died in the early hours of Monday morning of major organ failure, a 19-year-old with his entire life ahead of him, all because of a completely non-lethal spider that we've all seen inside our own homes at one point in our lives. Let this be a lesson to all of our viewers. It's not just the big fangs and the obvious venomous predators that could cause our deaths. Even the smallest bite from the most benign creatures can be fatal. If it's red and oozing goo, then whatever's going on beneath the skin is almost always much, much worse. Get yourself to the closest doctor as soon as you can, or you too may just meet your terrifying final affliction.